So this overview is on education, or the sociology of education. Again, think about this from the sociological imagination perspective. Expand the way you think about education in terms of the social impact, like inequality. So the big questions are, what are the major findings or functions of school? How is education related to important life outcomes, like a job, for example? Is education equally available to all? How do educational systems differ? And lastly, how do digital technologies affect education? The major we start with talking about the purpose of education. One purpose, of course, is socialization. That is, one of the major functions of school is to teach children how to interact and engage with other people. The relative importance of this is debated, but children still need to be able to interact with others. So think about this even from this recent pandemic situation. One of the ways that kids interact, especially in lower grades, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, is to interact and play with each other, and that's going to be severely restricted. There's a hidden curriculum too. So having children learn how to be nice to each other and to interact in appropriate ways is not necessarily on the curriculum that the school board encourages, but it's something that's there. So the weekly study hours that look at highly selective in purple, selective schools in pink, and less selective in orange. The more, if you want to go to a highly selective college, you have to study more, spend more time doing schoolwork. So future preparation is important, including the credentials that you get when you graduate, the knowledge that you accumulate, and of course, the education, the key to education as economic, as an economic development tool to society is priceless. In developing countries, the most effective approach to economic development is the provision of universal elementary education. So all kids are treated and given basics in education. High levels of human capital played key roles in the United States economic growth in the 20th century. So spending time and money on educating children is critical, especially in terms of economics. Question 2, how is education related to important life outcomes? The economic outcomes are obvious. Those with more education earn more money on average than those with less schooling, even when family background and academic ability are statistically controlled. And this is not only with high school, but community college, four-year degree, and advanced degrees. People make more money. The number of private sector workers and labor unions is shrinking, so people are getting more technical jobs. The U.S. manufacturing jobs, for the most part, have shifted overseas. And the growing concentration of financial assets in large global corporations means that the money is not necessarily staying within the borders of the United States. Why do people with more education reap larger socioeconomic rewards? Well, one theory that covers it is socialization theory, which includes the human capital theory and also the allocation theory. That is how the rewards are allocated based on your production. So if you look closely at education and life outcomes, the more education you have, the more likely you are to have positive outcomes. You see that educational attainment leads to occupational income. Educational attainment here leads to from social origins to occupational outcome, and then in lower class families, educational attainment doesn't necessarily lead to a job, but can cause all kinds of problems without having that sheepskin. For members of the upper class, social background is strongly related to educational level. So if you live in Wilmette, the odds are that you may be going to a private school, maybe that's more selective, and partly because you can afford it. For members of the middle class, educational background explains more variation in occupation and income than social origins. So people in the middle class maybe have to work harder. For individuals in lower class or poor backgrounds are likely to obtain less education and to take longer getting it than members of other classes. Civic and political participation is also affected by your education. Those with more education are more likely to participate in social, voluntary, civic, arts, and political events and activities. Why is education positively related to health and life expectancy? People with more education are more likely to demonstrate healthy behavioral habits and be in better physical condition. They're more likely to live longer and have access to health care, and which includes having insurance, and less likely to smoke, more likely to quit smoking if they do, less likely to be involved in dangerous, toxic work and living conditions. By the way, we call those life chances as well. Family life is different in the United States today. More educated people are likely to marry more likely to marry than less educated people. They're more likely to marry at a later age. They're more likely to marry at rates or rate their marriages very happy. This includes educational homogeny, that is, husband and wife or partners are educationally very similar to each other, maybe both college graduates. Question 3, is education equally available to all? It's a very difficult question to answer. Inequality exists in the United States. Children of different social classes are likely to attend different types of schools, to receive different types of instruction, to study different curricula, and to leave school at different rates and different times. This includes having, for example, access to STEM labs in some more upper class grade schools or high schools. It also includes having internet access or Chromebooks. In fact, the article that I included in the reading talks specifically about children in classrooms in the United States. Educational inequalities often is present in racial and ethnic gaps. Racial differences in educational achievement can be explained by historical and current systems of racial inequality. So, for example, one of the things that is going on with voter registration issues in the South is that, and did in the past, was you basically had to be able to read the voting instructions. If you didn't go to school and couldn't read, then that differentially affected you at rates differently than people that could read. And people of color had problems with reading. Racial differences in achievement are due to social inequalities rather than genetic differences. There's a gender gap in education as well. Girls favor girls compared to boys with respect to achievement and attainment. Just look at the number of valedictorians in high school classes. They tend to be more girls than boys. Favors males compared to females with respect to attending selective colleges and choosing majors leading to higher paying careers. This is not based on genetics. This is based on social and class structure. How do educational systems differ? Well, they differ around the world substantially. Is schooling equally available to children around the world? Well, the short answer to that is no, which includes having access to schools. Around the world, access to education varies widely with sometimes large differences by gender, class, and race. Some places in Africa prohibited girls from attending school. When we were in Uganda a couple of years back, their school technology included a small chalkboard and chalk, if they were lucky. Countries vary widely with respect to whether they have private schools, who attends these schools, and whether public funding pays for them. In private sector, about 28% of developing world students, 14% of developing world in developed world students. So if you're in a developing country, it's at 28, it's 14% in the developed world, like the United States and Europe. Organizational practices are different too in educational systems. There's these things, including high-stakes testing to where you place students, achievement tests used to set high student learning standards and raise student achievement. You probably remember a few years ago, there was a program called No Child Left Behind. That was a high-stakes testing venture that basically was to try to ensure that students would meet educational goals. It provided the wrong incentive for students and teachers. So, for example, one of the wrong incentives was teaching to the test instead of actually teaching students how to learn and think. Organizational practices also include tracking. It's widespread, but often subtle in the United States. So standardized testing is a good example of how you track progress of students in education. Creates an instructional, social, and institutional differences in learning experiences. Again, if you think about teaching to the test instead of teaching students directly. It influences student self-esteem and expectations about academic performance. This also takes on differences in different cultures. So some Asian cultures put a high premium on success in school, as opposed to more Western cultures. It limits teachers' perception of what grades are appropriate for students on different tracks. So your expectations might be different. And finally, question 5, how do digital technologies affect education? Pretty dramatically. How do schools use digital technology to enhance learning? Well, students learning monitor in real time. So the teacher can sit in a classroom and watch what a student's doing live. They can use it to do diagnostic assessments, like at IVCC, the reading and math achievement test that you take before you get placed into a general education class. And of course, the ability to teach in remote areas using online learning, or in this case, because of health and safety issues. The implication of digital technology in education are, some of them are just evolving right now. There's a potential for a growing digital divide, once again, between people that have access to high-speed internet and computers and people that don't. Difficulty in controlling ideas and information. That's one thing that was never anticipated, was how students would use the internet and some of the technology to study, to promote ideas, to do things like bullying, which are based in technology. And the formative demand of the students' time and attention. You've all been doing this for a semester now, and you realize how incredibly time-consuming this can be. And that wraps it up.